And it started.
Okay, perfect. So a week ago, we had a good first meet here looking through the eval team findings, and we got through a good chunk of them. I'm going to very briefly touch on any other findings maybe we didn't have a chance to discuss through. And then from that initial, it was a crazy slide set because I was trying to put my thoughts in one place, and there's kind of a lot of thoughts about this. That slide set resulted in like 100 something slides of just thoughts and resources and things to share out. But we're not going to go through that whole thing. I think we're going to move from that slide set to a much shorter, condensed kind of thoughts about what to do next. And the what to do next, I think, is going to heavily involve both the eval team and Bob. So I'm glad they're here today. So let me share slide set here. This is the one we're working from last week. So we had looked at some of those survey metrics. Hopefully this is showing up for everybody. And we saw a little bit of discrepancy here as you break down from elementary to middle and high. And we had gotten a little bit into a discussion related to screeners. I don't recall if I had made this point yet, but in terms of the specific screener, and Bob had kind of alluded to this too, for your specific district or for the schools, I guess I'm not necessarily too picky about what screener specifically we're using, but as part of an MTSS process, we definitely do need to think about the specific screener or screeners being used. There is the one that I had highlighted in this initial PowerPoint with the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. And as you'll see, once I switch over to this other PowerPoint, I actually, as I did more homework on it, I think there is good reason to think about this one in particular. But I know, Lisa, for you and your district, you were talking about a specific one that was very brief that could be used for that purpose. That's great, as long as we got some type of screener in place. For Kathy and Teresa, I can't recall where specifically you all are related to your screening tools, but SHAPE has that great resource library. And as I'll demonstrate once I get on this other PowerPoint, the SCDE, we actually have an office that has spent a lot of time thinking about specific screeners for SEL. There's actually an approved list of screeners. Many of them are paid screeners, so it's stuff that probably your SPED office or your school psychs would be familiar with, but some of them are free, which includes that strength and difficulties questionnaire. This is just an example of what those items look like, what those scales look like. You can probably just take a quick glance at this and think about how you might use a screener like this and then target intervention towards specific elevated scales. So one thing I know Bob has talked about is at tier 2, we really need to start thinking about matching our specific intervention to a specific need. And that's really the purpose of these screeners, is figuring out which kids, identify some kids that have needs, and then make sure that we can address them if we need to in a more targeted way than just the universal tier 1 curriculum. Before I move on from this, any thoughts or questions or additions?
That's good. Good summary.
Okay.
Just quick,
go ahead, Lisa.
For the RBHS program that is in our school, but not in the others, the SDQ is a screener that we use. Some of my therapists, before we're required to do a screening before we do the diagnostic assessment that takes us to the mental health disorder if the child has one. So that's the screener that we use. Several of my elementary therapists use that one pretty frequently.
Oh yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, and as I mentioned on our last call, it's pretty heavily used tool. So some of the other kind of big findings that we wanted to look at were related to, we were seeing some differences here in annual change between elementary, middle, and high. So as we think about some of our efforts, we could consider targeting some of those efforts either at middle school or at those grades above, or I'm sorry, right preceding middle school. So if we're looking at your specific districts, I pulled all the schools in your districts that either have a transition grade, like 6th grade entry to middle school, or any weird cases where there's a transition into the school from another grade. So in Anderson 2, for example, they've got a 3rd through 5th grade school. You might want to consider, as the aware coordinator for your district, these transitional periods are probably where it would be useful to do some screening and to think about the needs, the social emotional supports, and the needs of the kiddos as they transition into that building. And so, from my perspective, I think these would be highly appropriate target schools as we think about those needs. And then in Sumter and Florence, I noted, obviously, you all have lots more kiddos than Anderson too, probably on a scale of about 5 times as many. So obviously we can pick and choose a little bit as we roll some things out about which schools are probably the most ready, the admin's most ready, et cetera. From the staff surveys, Pyre did a great job of kind of taking that open-ended question about, are there ways that we can improve our MTSS processes so that they are more efficient and effective? And then grouping those comments by theme. And you can see the two themes that stuck out the most across the LEAs were more and improved staff trainings and education and systemic policy changes. And so I think I see those manifested too in the open-ended responses and the interview report that Pyre put out, that I think people in the buildings probably need some additional training, support, PD related to their MTSS processes. What is the process? What does it look like? What services do we have, and how do we identify kids for those services? And so I'm guessing that probably even within your districts, you know, the larger 2 districts having 20-something schools, you know, from one school to the next, those processes sounds like they might be different. Sounds like there's probably a different level of quality between those schools. That's where I think, and we're moving, kind of the argument I'm going to be making here is we're moving toward a need for some type of fidelity measure, some type of implementation measure to understand what exactly is happening in the school and what do those processes look like. Let's map those things out. So I'm not going to spend most of our time here, but in the slide set I sent last week, if you want to look through all the comments, it's basically stuff that we already know. They need to understand the differences between the tiers. They need to understand what the process is. They need some PD on it. They need some district-wide training. That training needs to occur at least annually. It needs to be clear. And obviously for the educators in the building, but also the families and the students, it would be helpful if it was laid out in some kind of clear visual aid. So that's where mapping these things out would be nice.
Devin, just real quick, and I don't want to slow this down, but here's the question I have. You know, when I get calls from the districts, from the LEAs, there's sort of two groups, and that generally they want some professional development or they want some discussion about. Number one, you have this sort of very broad group, the classroom teachers, everybody, all the adults in the school building that sort of interact with the kids, and that's sort of one level of professional development. The other is then sort of more targeted. Who are the people that are going to be interacting? And I don't mean to say systems people, but people that are more involved up the triangle at all different levels. And some of them could be at the universal level. And so there's really sort of when you talk about this globally, you really have to kind of think about what people we're talking about in the building that we're providing training to. And then the other thing that I really think we need to talk about, the differentiation, and not going to solve the problems now, but just keep this in the back of your mind as you go forward. There's a difference between PD and presenting a training of some sort to an audience versus coaching a group so the difference between PD and coaching, I think, is something we also have to keep in mind. I get a lot of requests for PD, and that tends to be, you know, what we call train and hope. You know, we're going to come in, do a little training, hope it sticks. And I think what we found is it generally doesn't. The second part of that is the other alternative is to go in and say, okay, let's really coach, you know, the processes here. And within that, obviously, we learn a lot of this information that the questions you have, I really don't understand MTSS. And that's done a little differently than it would be. We stand up in front of everybody and show them the triangle and show them those kinds of things, which we've done ad nauseum. Anyway, go ahead.
I agree. I think that's a great point related to coaching. Apologize for this not kind of being super linear here, but The ongoing support. One of the things that we know from you all is this idea of sustainability. So there's kind of a few important points here related to sustainability. One, obviously, in terms of resources or additional training your district may need, people in your district may need, we hope that you view the SCDE as a resource. And I'm actually going to share out additional information as I've gathered it from the agency here to you all. But two, related to kind of that coaching role, Bob, I know that you've identified or at least are aware of people in those specific districts that have the expertise to provide coaching related to MTSS or to interventions or to data-based decision making that probably should be somehow worked into their professional role in those districts. And that's really where I see sustainability is. And Lisa, I believe this conversation has already started in Florence too, but I really see sustainability as coming back to what kind of expertise is in your district and how can you make sure that you're making good use of it within that district.
Yes, we have started this conversation in Florence, and there's a lot of work to do. But yes, we have started this conversation. As Bob said, you know, you show them the triangle just forever. And so I've got some folks that I've trained a lot. Our literacy coaches actually are the coaches in our buildings. So we have that piece in place. And I think the best thing that ever happened on the behavior side was to merge with the academic side. I think that was a merger. Well, it came about for a lot of reasons, but I think it was the right step. But now it's getting it at the elementary level. Let me qualify that. But I think getting all of the entities to talk and communicate more and getting more training in the building for our principals, they understand it a lot better on the academic side. But our challenge is getting them to translate it over on the behavior side. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of work to do.
That is one of the key kind of points of this grant. It was written with the idea that, and the phrasing in the application is that ISF, that Integrated Systems Framework, MTSS, basically academic, behavioral, mental health, social emotional learning, like taking that holistic view. As we know, behavior issues don't usually develop in isolation. Like it could be related to other areas of need. So yeah, that's perfect. I want to kind of move quickly out of some of these evaluation kind of findings because I think we know what we see here in the evaluation. And I want to actually I'm going to jump presentations here to, I think I'm presenting my screen, so I think this will just show up. Can y'all see this actionable in year 4? Yeah. And we might jump between presentation, that's fine. But here's what I'm thinking prescriptively, what we need to be doing probably across our 3 LEAs. We really need to be moving in the direction of making sure that we've got MTSS or ISF, whatever framework you want to use, basically that we're addressing the holistic needs of the kid. And we're doing it well. And I know that this is going to take a lot of work. It's going to outlive the life of the grant. But some of the things that entails includes identifying a fidelity tool that will help us with our action planning. I know Bob has probably presented or talked about several of these, and there's actually lots of options as I've done some more homework on this. Bob has probably talked already about SHAPE has an assessment that could be used for implementation, kind of action planning. The tiered fidelity inventory, which was written into the grant application, I know that has come up, I believe, in some of the other aware grants. They're either using like the TFI or the SHAPE. As I did homework, the SCDE has guidance on MTSS. They've got something called the SAM 2.0, which was actually, it looks like it was developed out of the state of Florida. I had not heard of this tool specifically. I've got a link to it, but basically there's lots of different tools we can use, but we need to kind of land on one. And for the eval team, I guess my question to Dave and Pyre is, if it makes more sense for our evaluative purposes to make sure that whatever we're using the same tool across our 3 districts, or if we let those districts kind of pick and choose between tools. And I'll kind of turn this over to Dave here in a second. The other thought is, because as I was talking with Bob about some of these tools, some of these are kind of training heavy or a little bit cumbersome. We could basically pick and choose the most relevant portions as we understand it for our action planning, pick and choose from these tools, create a shorter, streamlined version, and use it for SC Aware. To me, it doesn't probably matter because I think all of these tools are going to get back to the same basic things of, do you have teams? Do you have database decision-making processes, et cetera? I guess to Dave, let me hear from evaluation team first, what thoughts we've got.
Well, I guess I'd say, yeah, from purely an evaluation perspective, there being a single tool that's done in a reasonably uniform way across the 3 districts would definitely be the preferable thing, no question about it. The 2 things I would add to that would be, one is, if there's good reason for it to be different across the districts, personally, I would hate to see the evaluation kind of drive that decision, because it's more important, I think, for the tool to work well for the district than it is for the tool to work well for the evaluation. If the evaluation's getting in the way of doing a good job in the districts, that to me seems like it's a problem. But that said, the second thing I'll add is, on its face, and I think Bob will know more, I would think that the relative virtues of a particular tool are likely to be pretty similar across the districts, and actually coming to some agreement, getting the minds together to say, yes, this is what we think is going to serve us the best across the districts is probably a really good way to go. It might, leaving it up to individual districts could be a district could miss something that another district catches as to why one is better than another. And I would think the collective minds might come to an agreement on one that works well across the board and that serves everyone's purposes well. So those are my thoughts on it.
So,
and Lisa, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just a thought maybe, or a question.
Go ahead.
But as we look at these tools, perhaps it would be helpful in a meeting where we actually kind of went through them, some pluses and some deltas around what might work. And we may find that we all agree on one, or we may find that different things work better in different places. That would help me a lot, because it's something I need to do, but I've got so many demands on my plate at the moment.
Lisa, I think that's a great idea. And actually, it was kind of why I was hoping to get the 3 of you together again, because I think one of our action steps is probably taking a look at the specific items on those tools and thinking, does this apply to us? Do we think, is this something that we want to have a measure on, basically? We can go through the instruments item by item and pick out. If we find one instrument collectively, we think it kind of hits the nail on the head, and Bob can give us the specifics on training up of use of that instrument. If we go with something that requires some training, we can basically make an informed decision as a group. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I am meeting with my district MTSS team this week, okay. And that's something that I can kick out to them. Just kind of, we're looking at some tools and would love for them to have some say in that process.
Yeah, and Lisa, what I plan to do after this call is this very short slide set I'm presenting from right now, I'll email this out. So if that kind of helps kind of direct some of that conversation that's useful to them, please use it.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really good. That's exactly where we need to be. And what it does is there's so many different aspects of this. We really need to talk through it with the 3 folks. It's what's on the survey. What do we need? How do we do this implementation tool in the easiest way? Who are we doing it with? Are we doing it with schools? We're doing it with the district? We're doing it with both groups? And then how do we use the information? That the beauty of this is, Lisa and also the other LEAs, it's going to make your life so much easier, because then you'll know, okay, all of our schools have a weakness here. So that then immediately starts telling you where you need to start working on PD and things like that. So it's really good. The other part of this is the decision-making piece, which will hold. But all of those examples you put into Fidelity Tools are good ones. The SAM, by the way, comes out of University of South Florida. It's part of the PBS MTSS initiative that takes place in Florida. We actually were a beta site in Charleston on that thing. It's not a bad one. It's not as widely used as some of the others, but it's pretty good. It's specifically for teams to figure out what they're doing. So they're all good ones that you have on there, or the option of coming up with, finding items of our own. I think you've really got this thing really put well together, put together well. Devin, appreciate it.
And for the LEA coordinators, and since we're recording this, I'm going to say this to all three of you here. There's some pluses to some of these tools. So SHAPE was developed out of the National Center for School Mental Health. So we're familiar with that group here. That SAM 2.0, as Bob mentioned, out of Florida, basically, if you read through the SCDE MTSS materials that we've got, we base a lot of it on the Florida stuff. So at least from the agency perspective, they would love for the districts to be using the SAM 2.0. The TFI's got wide kind of adoption. Looking through it, I think it's a good tool to us. But all that to say, we can pick and choose if we want to, if that makes it easier for utility for your specific districts. And then if that makes it easier, not necessarily guiding the direction of the project, but it is certainly a minor consideration on the evaluation team if we just use, some kind of custom created thing across the districts.
Yeah. Just one other comment, and I'll shut up. That TIPS thing, the TIPS PDSA thing is really critical as well. Lisa, you said something earlier. TIPS is beautiful because it is a problem-solving approach that the academic people and it's a problem-solving approach for RTI on the academic side, and it's the same process for behavior. And so these teams, when they get together, particularly if you're trying to get the teams to work together, academic and behavior, here's an approach that works well for both, and for coming up with interventions and both individual interventions, but then also school-wide and school-wide interventions. And so that's the other, getting this Fidelity tool and then getting everybody to problem solve in a way that works for everybody across all these different disciplines. That's the other piece of this, in my mind, that really makes it sing.
Yep. One other thing I'll add related to our Fidelity tool. So obviously from an action planning standpoint, it's got to have utility of telling us, well, where are we weak? What do we need to do? Where do we need to go? But from a long-term data-oriented standpoint, it does provide us basically a record of where we've been. So we've got, these 2 years on the AWARE grant, but even after following those years, it should hopefully be sensitive enough to the point that we can show, our MTSS might not be perfect, right? It might not ever be perfect, but in 3-4 years, we made progress from not having this. We didn't have these teams to now we have teams, and now they're engaged in a specific problem-solving process. And now we have interventions, and we check in on that, weekly. So I hope we see the utility of the Fidelity tool. I hope it doesn't feel like just another added thing to do. It will help direct our actions, but also serve as a running record, basically. Any other thoughts related to that so far? Any other discussion points? Okay, from that tool, it's going to tell us a lot of the stuff that I already know reading through this stuff and speaking with you all, things that we need to do. So we've got to have those teams. We've got to have some kind of process. We know reading through the evaluation information, we need some resource maps. So we need those, at the school level and district level. And then one of the, Bob's on a policy committee, and one of the things that I've kind of recognized as I've integrated in at the state agency level is we really need resource maps across state agencies too. So I think we need some resource maps. The Fidelity tool should hopefully tell us that. We spoke last meeting about the need for screening. And so actually in this slide, I think following or maybe 2 after, we can talk more specifically about screening. And then that tool should also hopefully help us figure out, what kind of stuff are we offering at tiers 1, tier 2, et cetera? What do we need? And so as I was going through and reading through the grant application, one of the things it talked about was, an anti-bullying curriculum, which I don't know that any of our discussions to this point have talked about any specific curriculum. I don't know, Lisa or Bob, are we actually, and it's fine if we're not implementing in the way that we intended at the point of the application, but do we have it? Are we doing anything related to anti-bullying or not really?
I don't know that we are. There
Okay.
was a big push a few years ago, a number of years ago, and it came out of Clemson actually, and it came out of the Center for Graduation and everything. A lot of schools purchased and spent a lot of money because it is costly for the Alveus anti-bullying curriculum, which is the best researched and the best one. A lot of great materials in it. The other curriculum that is the most structured is the one that's within PBIS. That's sort of the one I use. I did, in fact, I think I sent it to you, Devin. Did I send you the comparison between Alveus and PBIS bullying curriculum?
Send me that PowerPoint.
I
Yeah.
worked on that with the folks up at Winthrop. There you go. Cole Winthrop back in here, Gertrude. Dr. Mark Mitchell up there and I did some work actually with the State Department as well as the Association of School Administrators. But what has sort of happened is we've gotten into the kumbaya. We're going to have our bullying month. We're going to hang some signs up. Most of our districts now have gone to a bully box or a bully phone call number or a bully email address to, where people can report bullying anonymously. And we got a lot of good information. We talk a lot about it, but the structural curriculum has it's where we can with SEL, where we can include it in, but we haven't had that specific curriculum like an Alveus or like the PBIS curriculum. So I think the districts are doing a lot within sort of their SEL structure. I don't know if it's as focused as it could be. That's not to say it isn't good stuff, but I think that's sort of where we are. I would say keep going down that track. If we have schools or we have locations where we have a real bullying problem, that should be where we really look at implementing one of these curriculums. The difference is one is expensive. One of these two. The difference is cost. Quite frankly, PBIS curriculum is free. The Alveus curriculum is very expensive, but it's also the most researched one. So there you go. That's my answer.
Perfect.
And I guess in our elementary schools, we do the anti-bullying stuff. I've not really focused on that piece of it because I know that that's something ongoing that we do in all of our elementary schools.
Okay.
Where this gets tough, and I'll just be real honest, and Lisa, agree with me or not, where it gets tough is you have some bullying that occurs. You have a child who is bullied. And so we do our, we do our SEL don't bully and everybody, their kumbaya and everybody does their anti-bullying sort of exciting things. But then there's how do we then deal with the child who is the bully through a tier 2 or secondary intervention or necessary or tertiary intervention? What do we do with the child who is bullied? How do we then create an intervention for that person? And that's the piece that we're missing. So as we move up the bullying stuff that's done is sort of all at the universal level. And really what I want to focus on is that's fine because everybody's doing something there, as Lisa said. But then how do we help these administrators do something proactively to help the kid who's bullying and help the kid who's bullied on a tier 2 and at a tertiary level? Because what all you get is the parent comes in, the child is bullied, and I want this kid suspended. And, that is the least productive thing you can do to a child who is a bully, is to suspend him or to give him detention or something like that. That's the worst thing you can do because, quite frankly, usually that reinforces the behavior. So that's why you got to have these real secondary thoughts with some of our folks delivering secondary and tertiary interventions. What are we going to do with a kid who's been identified as a bully? What are we going to do as a kid who's and there's some interesting research on article that I sent you on as well about the kid who invites the bullying. You know, there's another term for that. I'm not using the correct term, but how do we then train that child not to become professional victim, essentially?
I think it probably all comes back to what you've been preaching on tier 2, which is function of behavior kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. So to kind of, I know we've kind of like maybe lost the thread a little bit here, but in terms of our year 4, that Fidelity tool, again, will basically shed light on what are all the steps that you should be taking, and we can prioritize from there too. Some of these steps will probably happen in sequential order. Some, you know, this step before this step before this step. In terms of logistics, I think it's completely fine for us to target our rollout. So this is a kind of new line of information for me. I'm still learning a lot of this stuff, but that NIRN group, Dave, they're probably actually near you. I think it's out in North Carolina, Chapel Hill, perhaps.
Devin, before you get too far from that bullying piece,
go ahead.
I would like to say something here because my granddaughter encountered a kid who told her a story about the Candyman. And my daughter is wondering, is that a form of bullying? I told her, I don't know. If I get a chance to ask somebody, I would. But she's terrified now because he told her about the Candyman movie or something or another like that. So how do you get defined what is bullying?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gertrude, and I'll be happy to talk to you offline. You know, there are a couple of things. A lot of times kids have a fight in school and the parent says, my child was bullied. Having a fight in school is not bullying. Bullying has to be a differential of power between the kids, and it has to be ongoing, repeated. I'll tell you what, offline, I'll sit down and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that question, Gertrude. So in terms of this rollout with fidelity measures, right? So we don't necessarily need to get all of, so Sumter's got 25 schools, Florence has 22, Anderson has 7. It's obviously more realistic to think that you could potentially get 7 different people and, you know, in Anderson to complete this fidelity measure for their buildings. But we can do some targeted rollout here. So I think probably the move is think about mutual selection. So which buildings, which admin, which buildings already have teams and are ready to be thinking about their MTSS processes. And Lisa, you're the one with your ear to the ground here in that district. I don't know how many school buildings you think, you know, out of your group here would be ready for this, but in year 4, as we're identifying our tool or developing a new tool, we can do a little bit of targeted rollout here. The end goal would obviously be that we at least have some type of fidelity measure on all of the schools across all of the 3 LEA districts by the time that we're in year 5. It at least gives us data points on where they're at. Even if they're not super far advanced at it, that's fine, but that data point will at least be a nice, healthy starting point, especially as we move off the grant. What questions or thoughts do y'all have related to that?
I think this is very reasonable. I think kids coming back to school on tier 2 and tier 3 just because of the pandemic has really kind of gotten the attention of a lot of our administrators. And so they recognize that they've got to do something different. So that's been a real plus for us, but it's also a real curse. Because they are just, I mean, I get a phone call every other day. I mean, they are struggling because the needs are so great. And teachers, I mean, I've got some principals telling my school-based therapists, just make sure my teacher doesn't quit. I mean, it's come down to just, let's keep the teachers, because there are so many issues in the classroom. And I said all of that to say COVID has been a blessing for us, but it's also been a curse because a lot of our administrators and teachers are just really kind of maxed out. And the thing that's astonishing for me is that we've only been in school for 2 months.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what this is going to look like 4 months in, because 2 months in, they're crying out for life preservers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you know, each school building's leadership is going to be a little bit different. So, you know, some of these will be ready and say, yes, bring it on. We need to build out some system supports. We see the need. Some of the school buildings, as you mentioned, you know, well, probably every school building to some degree is just trying to survive the day, which I get too. I think kind of the big picture here is, you know, we probably can't necessarily get the ball rolling with all 22 Florence One schools, but we can be strategic and make sure that whatever we get the ball rolling on, at least will be a good environment set up here that we can sustain that even post year 4, year 5, and hopefully that'll serve as a model within the district too. Like, these schools have got their kind of processes tightened up. They've got some teams looking at those processes. It seems like there's less of a need to support the kids on the individual level, you know, at tier 3, because the kids are getting some more targeted support here on tiers 1 and 2. I think is probably my thought.
We're in this blue ribbon schools, I think, process, if I'm remembering it correctly. So buildings are already sort of looking at some things, but I will say what motivates principals. And someone may have said it on the call about what motivates superintendents. The next district is doing something of the neighboring district. I think if we roll this out in a way where it's maybe not blue ribbon, but some kind of incentive from the State Department that, hey, this school is a, you know, model, and there's some bells and whistles and, you know, accolades that go along with it. I think that helps us get things done.
That's a great point. And I'm going to ask Bob on that specific element because I'm not sure to this point.
Yeah.
Bob, do we have anything? Does anything exist like a state level recognition?
Boy, Lisa, you stole my. I was going to go there next. I'm glad it was you and not me.
And listen, a monetary, you know,
yeah,
give the school $1,000, $2,000. Boy, let me tell you.
You're exactly right on both of those. Historically, there have been 2 things that we have done. Number one, when we first, and I'm going to use PBIS as an example here. When we first rolled out PBIS, there was, if you would roll it out, there was actually a monetary. You got $3,000 actually way back in the day. And that was for 3 years, was during the state improvement grant. And we did that. As a result, as we started running out of money, the leadership team that rolled out the PBIS initiative said, we still need to keep motivating these folks. And we came up with a state, well, we initially did it in Charleston. If you go to Charleston, you still see the banners hanging up in a number of schools, but that are very much blue ribbon. We had PBIS, PBIS blue ribbon schools. And we used the fidelity tools to determine, what they got. Now you have to be careful because we want the fidelity tools to tell us where we need to work. We don't want it to become a grade, because if it's a grade, then people start not being truthful. And then you don't get the things you need. So you got to be real careful about how you do that. But both the financial resource and an acknowledgement of some sort is absolutely the way to go. Principals, I can tell you principals, because they put that stuff, when we did it in Charleston, all those principals that won a blue ribbon PBIS school, man, that was in their curriculum betas. I led my school to whether they did much or not, man, let me tell you, they put it in there. So absolutely, both those things. And if we can figure out how to do that, you look at the SHAPE system, SHAPE, even though there's no money, if you complete the different things, you get a little certificate that says gold, silver, and bronze just for completing it. Doesn't mean anything because it's just how much of this thing you completed. But, people print that thing off and hang it up. It counts.
And that might be something here at the state agency. I might be able to get some conversation started around that. I think it's in this slide set, this very short slide set, Lisa, but basically MTSS is kind of within the Office of Early Learning and Literacy here at the State Department, and then Office of Special Education Services. Our office is within Student Intervention Services. As I navigate what resources we've got, what kind of expertise we've got here at the state level, and how to get it out to you all, that might be something that we can certainly get the conversation started.
And I am going through that class, that MTSS class that the literacy office there is offering.
Wonderful.
So I think, and they're talking about behavior interventions. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And I'm thinking something rising to the level of Molly Spearman saying, hey, this is a great thing. I think people will work for that.
Yep.
And some cash.
Yeah. We all work for that. That's why I'm here today. Not the only reason, but a significant reason.
And one other quick thing, can I just throw this in? Not related. Devin and I had a quick conversation about it, but at the State Department level, where there's RBHS, which is the counseling program that we have here in our district, when our legislators send out an increase for everybody in your school, physical therapists, occupational therapists, teachers, or whatever, and they totally leave out school-based therapy, and they will name social workers, but they don't name us. So everybody in your building, and we supported some of our folks last year, they got a raise, teachers, but they forget that there are some Department of Ed hired school-based therapists. Bob, I don't know if you can help with that, but that sure is a morale killer. And I know this is not the framework, or I'm sorry, I know this isn't the place to dig into this deeper, but Bob, I know you talk to people, so just throwing it out there.
Okay, that's a good thought, Lisa. I appreciate that. One other thing I'd mention, Devin, particularly around mental health, if you are talking about a recognition of some sort, and I'm way ahead of the game because you got to explore it first of all with OSIS and the early childhood offices, some kind of recognition. If you don't get anywhere there, we might talk to our friends over at DMH. At least around the mental health side, they might be willing to do something in terms of a recognition. I don't want to do an end run around the DOE, but that's just that. So everybody close your ears. You didn't hear me say that. But, if you need to talk to OSIS and that special ed and the other group first and see if you can come up with something. But if not, on a purely mental health level, hey, maybe we can, we can get a recognition there for our schools.
Perfect. Great thought. Go ahead.
I was wondering whether, and you'll be able to answer this, Lisa, probably, whether there's any carrot to there being more attention to a school that chooses to do this. And I'm thinking maybe, and most in particularly around DMH, and where they focus attention and additional counselor attention. I don't know if that's a draw or not, but given your, mentioning that schools are really overwhelmed with behavioral issues and not knowing where to turn, I just wonder whether if this in some way could be, portrayed and probably rightly as a way to sort of help assure that AWARE is focusing as much attention as possible on whatever schools are involved, that might be a draw too.
Yeah, I think so. I guess, and Florence is Florence. Let me just say that. In our district, the DMH side may not be as much of a carrot,
Right.
and not through any fault necessarily of DMH. It's just the dynamics of some things. I don't know that it would be in Florence.
Yeah.
But perhaps to that broader point that Dave brings up, there might be ways to differentiate the way we're using AWARE funds, for specific schools that are taking the steps that really they should all be probably moving in, but we know that you're not going to have all of them ready at the same time.
Yeah. And Devin, there's usually some carryover funds that we get at the end of each year. And, there's more flexibility with the carryover funds. So that may be something that you may actually, have something to work with when that time comes around as well.
Perfect. I want to keep us kind of on our track here. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm just going to hit on some points here and then we can kind of break. So related to MTSS guidance, published obviously by the SCDE. We've got Act 213, it was signed into law in 2018. Basically, it requires the district to screen all kindergarten and first grade students 3 times a year for potential reading difficulties and to develop district-wide process for offering interventions and services to students with academic and behavioral difficulties. As you read through the SCDE MTSS documents, basically, the recs include obviously like this is a starting point, but the end goal wasn't just to finish with literacy at kindergarten and first grade. The end point is to be using tiered services across the K-12, P-12 educational timeline. So the things that are kind of most relevant probably to aware include obviously incorporating, the SCDE recommends incorporating SEL screening into current MTSS processes. So obviously that would be highlighted by a fidelity measure if that's not already happening. And then also streamlining screening assessments. So I'm not aware to what extent you're using specific types of screeners in your district, but basically the same message that's coming from Bob as we think about MTSS, it's like consolidate your teams, make sure you got a nice streamlined set of teams. The same thing is really going toward the school districts and the specific schools in that district. Streamline your assessments, streamline, these things so that you're not over evaluating, over screening for different things. So if the district is using if a school building's using a specific screener and they've got a process tied to that screener, we don't need to lop on necessarily 3 different screeners for, the same thing is kind of my point. I've listed in here some resources for the LAA coordinator. So again, Kathy and Teresa, I know you're not on, hopefully you watch this. It's got information about SC MTSS. I'm actually very happy to hear that Lisa's involved in that PD with the state agency here related to that book kind of club. But there's the quick start guide. The SAM 2.0 is in there if you want to take a look through it. We'll take a look through it as a group and start picking and choosing what we think is applicable. That all is in there. Related to screening specifically, so here is the list of screeners that the SCDE SEL committee approved. As I mentioned, several of these are paid. So BASC is like a widely, basically any school psych or probably speech language pathologist or mental health professionals probably very aware of all those offerings from them. But a lot of these are paid. The free one that is cross-referenced against the SHAPE screening and assessment library happens to be the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. So I'm not telling you specifically use this tool, but it does come with some benefits of it's free and it was approved by the SCDE SEL committee. So if you're using it for the purpose of screening for SEL, it does do that purpose.
So Devin, FYI, the one that our district is looking at is the DESA, the DESSA.
Okay. And you said that was the brief one, is like 8 items or something?
It starts with 8, and then if more is needed, it gets kicked up to maybe a tier 2 where someone else can do the screening besides the teacher or in conjunction with the teacher. But we're going to only ask our teachers to do the 8 questions initially.
Yep. I think that seems appropriate. And I'm guessing, does the DESA have is there a self-report form of that? Does a student ever complete a?
Actually, it doesn't. It's a report by the educator, by the teacher. Yeah. So that is a little different. I've looked at some of the others. I've looked at the BASC and I've looked at the SABRES, and I like the DESA actually better. And I think those others have a self-report function actually. Maybe it's the SABRES that has the self-report function.
Okay. Yep. And, we probably talked about this before, but for all 3 LAA coordinators, obviously the source of your information is important. So obviously the teacher, the adult in the room may be able to identify things that the child might be oblivious to or not realize. But that child input too is important too, because that teacher or adult in the room might not be able to pick up on internalizing type concerns. So I really think a robust screening system probably incorporates a little bit of information from multiple sources. That's great. Some other SEL guidance, and I wish I'd known this before you all had started. I know that one of the things that all the LAA coordinators were doing was coordinating or navigating what SEL curriculum you're going to use. Apparently, we've got all kinds of free SEL curriculum on the SCDE website. I don't know if you all knew about this. Lisa, were you aware of this?
No.
We got some free stuff, and apparently some of it's even used by other Aware projects. So if you click on this link on this slide, it will take you to there's free curriculum for 4K all the way through 6th grade. And then basically once you get to middle school SEL, we have paid, and I don't know the specifics on this, but we've paid for service through EverFi that has lots of SEL curriculum stuff. So I know that when I spoke with the NC Aware folks, they mentioned if you haven't heard about EverFi, that might be something to look into. I would probably suggest if you need long-term sustainable SEL curriculum stuff, look on the website first. And then if you need help navigating further from there, we can put you in touch with an SEL, the program coordinator from the agency. Some other stuff. This was related to the pyramid model. I actually was not too familiar with this, but this has got some fidelity and data tools for this. And pyramid model is for kind of early childhood stuff, so 18 months through 6 years. So that's just some additional stuff for consideration. Bob, you might be familiar with this, but my understanding is it's basically MTSS for SEL. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct. That is.
Okay, perfect. What other things? The last thing that I'll leave us with, we've got 5 minutes. So I think I mentioned here that the MHTTC, that Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network, they provide technical assistance. And one thing that they've realized here, so that group is funded by SAMHSA. And then our Aware grant is also funded by SAMHSA. So one thing they've realized here is that there should be like a national coordination between the technical assistance that they provide and all these state and tribal agency Aware projects. And so in totality, I think the number of projects is like, there's like 60 something Aware projects happening across the country. And in terms of MHTTC, there's 8 regional centers, I think 2 other specific centers, and then the national center. So I say that all that to say, they are specifically, trying to figure out what kind of research, what kinds of needs do these specific regions have. And so our region is the Southeast. It contains, I think, up to Kentucky and Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, et cetera. One of the things they're trying to do, since they've been funded to continue doing, research and develop tools that are supposed to be, accessible to, for free, is figuring out what needs do these areas have. So the thing I want to point you to is, and I can send this catalog along with this slide set, but they've got a resource catalog of stuff they've already done. And a lot of this stuff relates directly to the Aware grants and probably, directly toward whatever it is that you're seeing at the school level and the district level. The things that they need, is they've got a needs assessment. So if you click on this link, my thought was that we could complete this as a group, but we only have a few minutes here. I might open it up and you guys just tell me what kinds of technical assistance needs we see, and we can submit it, get them thinking about what kinds of stuff they should be providing here in this next year. Bob and Dave, I know you all are connected with MHTTC or at least familiar with some of these things. Is there anything else to add to kind of that background?
No, they provide a lot of good PD. We haven't been very intentional about it. Anytime that one has come across my desk that looked like a good professional development, I've shared it through your office with the LEAs. They had one just came out this morning, quite frankly, on telemental health, which had a lot of interesting information about funding and sort of support from HSSS and Medicare and Medicaid and those kinds of things, as well as some others. They just did one on mental health issues with kids who are identified with developmental disabilities. It was excellent. And it was so good, we're gonna ask that lady to come and present at the conference in the spring. So there's a lot of good stuff here, and if we can do it more deliberately like you're trying to do here, Devin, I think that's much better. What we've sort of done is do what we can do. We had a meeting when Aware first started. They actually came over and we had an all-day meeting at the Department of Mental Health. and we came up with 2 specific goals. All the aware districts were there, as well as some other districts. People like Nancy Turner out of Rock Hill, who's, as we all know, is doing a lot of work in a lot of different areas. And I like talking with Nancy because Nancy understands the broad range, but she's also got some of the same issues specifically that Lisa does with her own RBHS people. So, you know, they were there. I can't remember what the 2 goals were at this point. We never, it kind of fell apart, but I think they are a fantastic resource. And so we need to be more intentional about how we involve them, no question.
Couple of thoughts that I have about that is, one way to involve them is when we invite them to some of our meetings. I'm not sure if it's the aware group meeting, but some of our meetings where we or this sort of one where we talk about the challenges and what we're trying to get done. I think they may be able to look at their resources to see if there's a fit for some things that they can do to help us. And I think the second thing that sort of stands out for me as it relates to them is, at the beginning of every school year, and Bob, you know this, there's always a cry for professional development.
Yep.
And if they can somehow get connected with ongoing conversations to offer free professional development for teachers, like I'm thinking about the WISE program and how to get that in our schools.
Yeah, they did the Classroom WISE. They're the ones who developed it. Yeah, along with Center.
At the beginning of the year, what I would love is to say, hey, guys, can you all either come to our school? Can I get you to do some mass PD for our teachers? And if school districts can get that for targeted audiences, and they don't have to, and I know that's a lot on their part, that's why they do it electronically. But I think if you're going to introduce them to a school, to have someone come in the building and do a PD is a big deal, especially if it kind of, if you scratch us where we're itching. So
yes, I probably should have added. So they're using the form as a way to kind of start collecting like what needs are there, but we're actually having a regional meeting this week. So all the aware coordinators across our region, and I think we actually have the most aware projects for an MHTTC region, will be meeting together saying, these are the needs we're hearing from our LEA coordinators. These are the needs we're seeing. This is how you can help. And they're basically helping develop their plan of attack here for this next year.
Yeah, based on that, and I know we're running over, I apologize. Lisa, based on what you said, is probably not going to be possible. They'll send somebody to something like a big conference, like we talked about. They would come to some statewide training. Doubtful that they would come to not saying that they won't, but doubtful that we get them to be able to come to a lot of, because they don't have the resources to do that. But they're going to have all of this wonderful library. So now this goes back to where we started this conversation a little bit. If we can have some folks that really understand the MHTT stuff in the state, myself or our LEAs or people that you identified, that they can then work with this electronic stuff that they have, and they could come up with a way, I'm really thinking out of the box now, come up with a way where they're standing in front of your group, but we have the electronic resources that are running with them. That might be the way to get some of this done, to use their resources, but then also tie it back to this local expert that then is available. So think about that. That might be a way to go.
Sure. One quick question, Devin, when is that meeting this week? Because from Thursday on, I'm going to be kind of off the grid for some annual other things that I have to do, Gertrude, every year. So yeah, I'm going to be off the grid Thursday, Friday, and trying to, and my school district is out the first week of October, and I'm going to need that. Oh my God.
Well, congratulations. That call is actually on Thursday. Lisa, that call is on Thursday at noon, and I can't recall specifically if they have invited. I don't know how granular they've gotten on that invitation list.
Yeah.
So,
well, no, I see it. I just wanted to make sure this SE aware planning call is at, but I will not be able to be on that call, unfortunately. I apologize.
So if you will, take a moment, then like I said, I'll send this slide set out, click the link, type in any needs that you're like, oh, I'm drowning here. I need some technical assistance on this. And they'll at least have it at that point. Or shoot me an email and I can communicate it to them.
That might be easier. You may get it from me at midnight one night, but I'll get it to you. Okay.
Perfect. I think this is great. Before we break, I think our kind of next step is the next time we have this meeting. So it will be, I think, probably 3 weeks or so from now, because this will be about a monthly meeting. The big thing for the eval team coming up is they've got to finish up year 3 pad reporting into SPARS and whatnot. And on top of that, Dave's taking vacation. I'm so jealous. But after we get through that component through mid-month next month, and once we meet again, I believe it's the third Monday of each month, I think we're going to start looking at fidelity measures and figuring out what the heck it is we're going to be using so that we can start doing some action planning and also documenting the things that have already happened as a result of this grant. Because I imagine that lots of things have happened in the past several years that have happened, but we might not have it documented necessarily on like a fidelity tool. So I think that's our step. Dave, Bob, any other thoughts?
One other thing.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I don't know. I think they do, but for some, the first training they didn't. But they have got to offer some CEUs or renewal credits for their training. That's the carrot. Whenever they're training, that's got to be a huge thing. And Bob, that first initial meeting that we had, they didn't offer it. So that's a real key there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we've we've said that. Kathy has really harped on that. So yeah, they've heard that loud and clear. Devin, let me ask you a quick question. Would it be easier next steps for you and I and maybe Dave to pull out some of these implementation measures that you've mentioned, you've listed, lay them side by side in an organized way, and then maybe even, and I don't want to cut off our LEAs, but as busy as they are, maybe even go through and say, okay, here are 20 common things we see across all of them. So we can say, well, we are going to use the SAM 2.0, or maybe we're going to do the, I don't know. Would it be worthwhile for us to help out the LEAs a little bit with some structure here? Yeah,
I think that would be good to go ahead and call through an initial look through these tools and basically be able to do this in a pretty quick and easy way the next time we meet. I think that's a great point.
Okay. Let me know.
Okay. Anything else, y'all? I know we're a little over.
That all sounds good. I do have to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dave, for joining.
Sure. See you all later.
See you, Dave. Thank you, Lisa, for joining. And like I said, as soon as we get off this call, I will send out the slide set with the links, send out an email with the relevant points here, and then we should have a recording sent out to the other 2 LEA coordinators. Let me know if y'all need anything else. Otherwise, we'll be in touch here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, Devin, I wish Dave was still on. I just want to say you did a really good job pulling all these points together. Excellent work. Haven't seen it that clear. So good, really good job.
Perfect. Thanks. I've been pulling my hair out. You might not be able to see it, but it's taken a lot of brain power to try to make sense of it all.